basically universe under stress globe. I'm very fortunate actually, not only because Dr. Abdullah is a very dear friend, older friend, also because we have another very good friend of mine, Professor Mahmoud Mohieldin. He needs no introduction. Professor Mahmoud has been, his name been synonymous now with the climate change and sustainability for a very long period of time. He was the champion of COP27, and he is online to give comments afterward on Dr. Abdullah talk. Let me say that Dr. Abdullah has a doctorate in engineering. A lot of people here in University have a degree in engineering. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed by the engineering point of view. So he has been in public service for a long time. Also as a former minister of infrastructure and projects. Let me say that he has been known around the world as being very dynamic, very forthcoming in terms of area that needs cooperation. Environmentally, he has really voiced a lot of concern on different critical issues. And let me say, we are very, very glad that he is here in town. And he doesn't want even to stay a bit longer because after this lecture, he is off to the airport to go back to his usual work. But I think we took a promise from him that he will come for a longer period where we can actually take him to classrooms and make sure that our student will benefit from his wide knowledge and expertise. I am not going to stay long because I know we are a bit late. I just have to acknowledge the partnership of the Economic Research Forum, who hosted this lecture with us here at Nyan University. I am wearing two hats because I am the Dean of the Business School at Nyan University. I am also the chair of the Board of Trustees at the Economic Research Forum. So in this case, he is hitting two birds with one stone in this case. I'm going to leave the floor for Dr. Abdullah to give his talk. And afterward, I think 20-25 minutes, Dr. Abdullah is okay. And afterward, Dr. Mahmoud will give his comments. And if there is time, we can open the floor for questions. Dr. Abdullah, the stage is yours. Thank you.
How difficult it is. Good morning. Good afternoon. How difficult it could be talking one back on the other end, Dr. Mahmoud. Thank you very much for giving
Dr. Hassan, Dr. Abdullah, it's very hard to listen to anything from your side. Sorry for the interruption, but if you can hear me, I cannot hear anything from your side.
I don't know if I'm this microphone, but I'm sorry. Are we fine?
Yeah,
Am I
we'll,
fine, Doctor?
we'll wait for a second to make sure that the connection is. Dr. Mahmoud, if you hear anything, just let us know. It's technology.
Now, yeah, when you mentioned technology, it started to work.
Started to work. That's really
So
great.
this is the magic word, Dr. Mahmoud.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud. Thank you so much, Dr. Mahmoud, for being with us, and very good morning to you. A topic like climate change has become very popular today. Popular in a sense that we've been talking about it for the last 2 decades, but we are not really aware of what we are to face on its severity. I believe that there are 2 reasons that made it so difficult to really understand what is the impact, the real impact of climate change. One of the stresses that very few people talk about is the knowledge stress, how knowledge is transferred among us who speak on climate change. Many people assume that it would probably pass by in a decade or 2 decades, and sometimes we find it so difficult to understand what is it on stake here. I will try really to avoid talking about the knowledge stress that we have. But the knowledge stress contains the information, the misunderstanding, the misinformation that we receive on the substances of climate change. We've been talking about many substitutes to fuel. We went to hydrogen, we went to solar, we went to methane, and what have you. There's so many that we've talked about. But very few people spoke about the disability of other sources of alternative fuel to our life today. Yes, our life is being affected by hydrocarbons. That's true. But life is also being enlightened by the fuel that we have today. All the agreements that we spoke about in the past, whether it is Kyoto, Montreal, Paris Agreement, they all talk about pollutant gases. Lately, we started to speak about CO2, and we forgot about the impact of other gases. A month ago, I was actually lecturing in Dubai in a lecture where students are. One of the speakers came to me and says, Abdullah, when are we going to get rid of this carbon dioxide? I was surprised. This is the misknowledge that we receive. We want to get rid of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is actually part of our gases on our atmosphere. Without carbon dioxide, I'm not sure if we can survive. Without carbon dioxide being in our atmosphere, at its size, we would be living, in fact, on danger. We might not even survive because the temperature of our global Earth would actually be, or the global temperature on Earth would actually be on a 0 Fahrenheit. And 0 Fahrenheit is actually minus 17 minus. Students could do that arithmetic calculations. But we would be on the negative side of the temperature. So it's not, carbon dioxide is part of our life. And it has to be there. Without it, we cannot be surviving. Our life should actually be good with the same size of potent gases. So I believe that there are 3 stresses today that we face. One, the knowledge stress that we have. Second is the nature stress that we would be talking about. And the third is the solar cycle. Solar cycle is also part of our stress that we face. Even prior to the 1800, even prior to the industrial revolution that we face, the solar cycle was actually making the climate differences, making the climate impact on our life. Today, we would actually be touching the long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns, and that is what we call climate change. On the 1800s, just before the industrial era, the atmosphere was concentrated by about 280 ppm of carbon dioxide. Today, we actually exceeded the 400. Scientists today want to keep this change unchanged, because if it is doubled, then we would have disasters that we would actually be seeing on what we have on these reports. So our life, if what IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, is forecasting that we would actually be reaching between 2 Celsius and 5. And the agreement, Paris Agreement, as Dr. Mahmoud actually knows better, it's actually is to be within the 1.5 and shouldn't exceed 2. Our reports today that we're seeing, that we are facing, is actually beyond that by far, even if we stay as we are. On 2015, all nations got in Paris to agree on Paris Agreement. And that Paris Agreement, I believe, is the change of the process that thought to be able to control the climate change. The earlier, or Kyoto protocol, was compulsory. All the G20, at least, nations have to reduce 5% of their global emissions. And they gave the opportunity for developing countries to catch up, because the G20 are the polluters who polluted our atmosphere by more than 75% during the last 3 decades. So that is the climate change and the stress that we would actually face. Okay. So what we have on the stresses is the reports that we receive from the IPCC, and what they claim that IPCC report, if temperature increase only by 0.1%, 0.1 degrees Celsius, wildfires will burn 35% more than the year before. Let's see small report that we face on the bushfires in Australia. If you just allow me to go on this.
Australia is on fire, and it's bigger than you think. 12.35 million acres of land have been burnt by bushfires so far. That's almost twice the size of Belgium, and 3 times more land than the 2018 California fires and Brazil's 2019 Amazon fire combined. Flames have reportedly reached 70 meters high. That's taller than the Sydney Opera House. At least 19 people have been killed and more than 1,400 homes have been destroyed. Residents and tourists have been forced to relocate.
Just get out while we can.
Nearly 500 million animals have died in New South Wales alone. The fires aren't just in one location. They're raging everywhere across the country. So what ignited this deadly crisis? Well, bushfire season is nothing new in Australia, but this summer has been one of the hottest and driest in the country's history. Since September, the combination of drought, unprecedented heat waves, and strong gusty winds has created a recipe for disastrous fire conditions. On top of that, the smoke from bushfires generates its own weather, sparking thunderstorms with lightning and strong winds, which create even more wildfires. Scientists have been predicting such extreme weather for years, warning that bushfires will become even more frequent as climate change worsens. Although the weather has cooled slightly in parts of Australia, authorities say with months of summer left, the worst is yet to come.
The worst is still to come. That is absolutely the case. Why we think that the worst is yet to come? Simply because we are having an agreement that gave each government the opportunity to identify what they want to reduce during the next 2 years. Each country would definitely look into their benefits, and that is the case. The environmental stress is not only droughts that we face. The environmental stress is actually more than that. It is when the biotic factors are affecting our life, food availability, temperature, water availability, and also water rise. We've been looking into our beautiful city, Alexandria, that we actually, all of you know what sea rise is doing at that particular country. And we all know what the government is trying to do to make life a little bit easier. Let's see.
As a result of global warming and the Mediterranean Sea's rising levels, Egypt could lose one of its treasures, Alexandria, with its ports, its ruins, and its 6 million inhabitants. The UN Climate Panel has already written the worst-case scenario. In 2050, the sea will rise by 1 meter, then it will swallow a third of the ultra-fertile land of the Nile Delta, and historic cities like Alexandria will be flooded. The North Coast is very sensitive compared to the Red Sea coast. That's why we give it priority when it comes to climate change projects. The citadel of Cape Bay, built in the 15th century on a narrow strip of land, is in the front line. In an effort to protect the citizens and the land, a belt of reeds has been planted along 69 kilometers of coastline. Alexandria, with its long history of construction and destruction, does not want to see its heritage vanish. We are trying to get the required funds, as the projects to protect the coastline are too expensive. They require huge concrete blocks, and one of the challenges is that we cannot work all year round. We can only work on days where the waves are calm, when we can use our equipment. The COP27, which is to open on November 6th in Egypt, will allow the Egyptian government to discuss further solutions to prevent what seems to be an inevitable tragedy.
Unfortunately, this is the case in our beautiful city in Egypt, Alexandria. The comment was we would actually be doing what we can when there is no sea rise. I believe that we should really look into this beautiful city in a different, probably non-traditional matter of dredging and actually having rock to protect an old palace only. The whole city could actually be in a limbo. We would not be able to even go for Alexandria anymore. Many cities have been given the opportunity, or islands, to be replaced by other islands. As we speak, people in Jakarta are having similar difficulty in the capital of Indonesia, and they are actually doing something different than what we do in Alexandria. One thing that we should say, no nation, no region will be exempted from the effect of climate change. If temperature, a global temperature on Earth exceeds 2 Celsius, no matter how big is this nation, how strong it is, it would definitely be facing the same difficulties and the same impact. The IPCC reported by region who is affected more. Unfortunately, Africa participated the least on climate change, but they're facing more difficulties than any other nations. Asia is probably the same. I know that I'm limited with time, Dr. Hassan. I'm very sorry. But we should also look into some numbers just to see how in Africa, almost 100 billion a year, $100 billion a year should be spent to make things better. In Pakistan, a year ago, they had to spend 30 million US, sorry, I'm very sorry. I speak of million, it is 30 billion US dollar. And that is the Pakistanis' budget for the year. They had to spend it to make interception for the impact of climate change. So things are not as easy as we think. On 2015, and the Paris Agreement was formed. The G20 plus United States have promised the developing country to participate with $100 billion a year for damages, or that is finance for the damage that they made to the atmosphere. Not the developing country made, the G20 made to the environment. And since then, there was no enough fund, at least to Africa, that actually had the worst in impact of climate change. This report would show us.
We are here in Malamin County in Garissa, and what we are seeing is a severe drought. This is the fifth time that we've had the harvest failure. This is not just an incidental drought. This is the new normal. We are living in a climate crisis. This is not caused by any of the people around me. If the G20 countries step up and reduce their CO2 emissions, frankly, we will not have this problem. Now, we've just come out of COP27, and what we've seen is finally we have agreement on loss and damage, a path forward. That's fine. Now we need to see the resources on the table, because we cannot have people here moving from crisis to crisis. We need to stabilize this through investments into water resource management, into sustainable agriculture, and into alternative livelihood system. This is what the UN will seek to do under the work of the resident coordinator.
Great. This is a city in Africa. The question is, can we mend or fix the impact of climate change? Or can Paris Agreement made things possible? According to the report, same IPCC report, the GAP report indicates that the existing bridges leave the globe on 2.4 to 2.6 degrees Celsius at the end of the century. And that is, in fact, another disaster. Since the indices or the nationally determined contributions of governments that has been agreed upon on Paris in 2015, the commitment in all countries did not exceed 10%. It's actually 6%. So if we continue with this pace, by the end of the decade, by the end of the century, we would actually be going way beyond the 2.6 indicated in the GAP report. So it is very essential to look into the climate and our atmosphere and our Earth in a more determining factor than actually looking into options of alternative to our carbon dioxide emissions. In the globe, maybe students here, they know it better. In our atmosphere, the percentage of carbon dioxide, can anyone tell me what is it? How much? It is actually 0.04. And that is compared to maybe other 1% plus and minus of vapor. The vapor in the atmosphere is actually more potent and having more impact than carbon dioxide on our Earth. The only difference that vapor have very little, we have very little control on. We can only control carbon dioxide. We can also think of some way of adaptations and mitigations. We looked in many, and all the time, we only think in one way. What are the possible alternatives that we could be phasing out oil and gas and having a new fuel? Most of our elite in the industry thought of hydrogen. They never thought of going back to the root of the problem. They look into the results of it. Yes, carbon dioxide, fuel and gas is polluting our environment. There is no doubt about it. But carbon dioxide is less potent than methane. Can we look into mitigating methane, or at least 50% of it? I made a little bit of calculation. If we managed to reduce or mitigate the methane that we use today in our homes, in our auditoriums, in our schools, if we mitigate 50% of it, we could actually be saving about 0.2 degrees Celsius. And that is not little. If we manage what we have today of methane, just to give an example, if you allow me to. The methane today that we have, or we as man-made gas, comes along with our drilling, but it comes from other sources as well. But some sources, the West does not want to really give it up. In a year, 900 billion tons of emission of methane was dumped in our atmosphere. To calculate this, to make it relevant to our carbon emissions, it is the sum of the emission of carbon dioxide from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar together in a year. Isn't it an idea to look into possibilities of having other options? Because most of our hydrogen, most of our methane, in fact, comes from our friend hydrogen. That is the future fuel. Methane is actually 80 times potent than carbon dioxide. So we should be looking into the roots, not the end product. 15 years ago, in the Montreal Agreement, we thought that there is a gas that is affecting our ozone. And that gas was fluorocarbons, if my chemistry helps me. We decided to phase it out and come up with another potent gas that we use today in our heating, in our air conditioning, in our industry, and that is 1,000 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So one really has to look into option of, just exhibited the potent gases. Yes, carbon dioxide is actually in the top, but methane is actually 25 times in the relativeness of its global warming potential of methane. Other gases reaches thousands. We're still looking into other options. If we manage to save the newly introduced as a man-made gas for our air conditioning, if we replace it by another man-made or the natural gas, guess what? We can save another 0.1 degrees Celsius. That 0.1 that will save an island somewhere in Asia. So it is very essential to go to the basic and look into the science of the things rather than look into the politics of it. I'm not saying that carbon dioxide should not be traced. It is a potent gas that we really need to get rid of. But what is easier? It is easier to look into those gases that we introduced to the atmosphere. We introduced methane by looking into options of hydrogens. The hydrogens, if I know that it's taken more than the time, but hydrogens is one of the gases, or probably those who are in chemistry or biology, they know better. It is the lightest gas that we could have. How can we use the existing network to transfer hydrogen from X to Y? The assumption was to use the existing network. Guess what? The existing network is not good enough for this low dense gas. So what we're going to add to it, our friend of methane, 80% to 20%, that is the theory behind it, to use the existing network. Lately, a month ago, in the United States, a study came to say, I think it was a Yale study, to say that the existing network, even at 80%, is not good enough. It would be impossible to transfer hydrogen from a place to another. So I believe that much has to be looked at. Science has to be looked at. My suggestions, apart from looking into other potent gases, man-made gases, and we get rid of them, I think we should hand over the climate change gas, the climate change file, to institutions, not to politicians. Institutions can look into where it comes from. We managed to control nuclear simply because there was an organization that regulates that nuclear emissions. We managed to regulate the oceans simply because there is an IMO in England that regulates all the related to oceans. So we might as well look into an organization that really could save our earth and save us from catastrophes. I should thank you very much. I could go longer, but I know that Dr. Mahmoud is on the other end. I am very sorry, Dr. Mahmoud, for being a little bit late. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. It has been a very enriching and very provocative talk, I would say. I know that Dr. Mahmoud is on the other side, but let me first take a moment to welcome Professor Ra'id, the president of Nile University, coming to the audience. And let me just say that what Dr. Abdullah did. He has really provoked the thought in bringing two very close to my heart issues in his talk. First one is Alexandria. Everybody knows that I have an Alexandrian passport, and we and the other one is the third recommendation that he has given. I don't know if Dr. Mahmoud will be also concurring with giving part of the financing to the educational institution in order to go for these searches. But the most provocative thought that I have heard has to do with carbon dioxide not being the most fatal, so to speak, as far as global warming is concerned. I keep, everybody knows that I always try to relate to simple stories. When Dr. Abdullah is talking about carbon dioxide and how less important it is than the methane and the other gases, I remember the story about the young kid who is keep crying in the corner of a street. And an old man came to him and asked him, "Why are you crying?" He said, "I lost a coin in the other street." And he said, "And why are you doing here?" He said, "I'm trying to look for it." He said, "But it was in the other street." And he said, "Yes, it was dark. Here is its light." And that's apparently what we are doing by focusing on this carbon dioxide. I'm not sure if Dr. Mahmoud is going to agree with that, but I'm going to give him the floor. Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud, for coming online, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This was a wonderful presentation by His Excellency Dr. Abdullah Al Nuaimi. He brought in few minutes his knowledge and background as a practitioner, as an engineer, as a policymaker, and he managed to highlight very complicated matters in few minutes. I bet if we have more time, he has more to say. But I like really to react what he said on what could be then, given his discussion and emphasis on a variety of sources that are harming the climate and environment, and this adequate emphasis on methane gas. What should be the action then? And he is very much right that, yes, we recognize for many years now the harmful impact of emissions coming from the use of fossil fuel and other sources, and the impact through carbon. But at the same time, methane as a dangerous, harmful gas, as per the scientists, including actually in the IPCC report that His Excellency mentioned, yes, it may come as number 2 in that table that he shared with us, but in terms of harm and the fact that it lasts longer, it needs different treatment than what we are trying to do. There had been some good recognition of the dangers. There are now networks and initiatives trying to focus on how to deal with methane, especially from the transport sector, from the energy sector, and of course from the agricultural sector. There have been some initiatives during Glasgow and had been emphasized as well during the Sharm el-Sheikh. But all of what he said, His Excellency Dr. Abdullah, is basically emphasizing one of the main things that have been shared during COP27. And I'm happy that our brothers in the United Arab Emirates are taking, as presidency for COP28, are taking it seriously, which is the holistic approach in dealing with climate change. Actually, as developing economies, as emerging markets economies, we have been subject to a very harmful treatment of climate change and the environment deterioration. By having a kind of a reductionist approach for the whole matter related to sustainability and climate change to mean only carbon, and Dr. Nuaimi has warned us against this kind of an approach that is ignoring many important aspects that are as harmful, if not more, to economy, society, and nature. And then focusing on carbon meant only one thing: carbon pricing, carbon pricing, carbon pricing. While one shouldn't really minimize or undermine the importance of dealing with carbon, as the IPCC report had been highlighting actions towards it, but at the same time, a holistic approach towards sustainability is the way to go. And for that, I think the outcomes of COP27 have been very much helpful in these regards, by trying to bring not just climate crisis on its own treatment. We are in a world that is overwhelmed by a variety of crises. You call it polycrisis, you call it permacrisis. Actually, we called it polycrisis and permacrisis during the time of COP27, and this was before the threats that we are witnessing in the financial markets as well. So at the time, we're talking about climate change as a crisis, talking about the impact of the Ukraine war, of course, the lasting impacts of the health disasters because of the pandemics, and of course, the some of the cures that have been put forward here with some of the crises ended up to be themselves sources of new crises. But then, talking to you from Washington, what is really getting many people concerned of the policymakers, and I bet that they haven't had calm weekends since the eruption of the problems of the regional banks in the US. It is very impractical to deal with the climate change as an isolated matter. And it's, even if we focus on climate change, we cannot just say it's an issue of carbon and carbon pricing and imposing some taxes on carbon and some cross-border taxes. This will solve the problems of the world. Because even if we are doing that, assuming that we have the alternatives, which we don't really have, as substitutes to energy, the energy mix is still very much dependent on fossil fuel. And any kind of realistic discussion here, the just energy transition, phasing out from fossil, investing in renewables, and dealing with the impact on the economy and society, I think it's very much the way to go. To give credit to the United Arab Emirates as a host, I was in a room many years ago when His Royal Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, at the time, he said that this will come one day. It will come a day when we are going to celebrate the exportation of the last barrel of oil. And he said, because we are going to be ready for it. The issue here is basically about being ready for getting rid of oil. This means that you will have the alternatives, you will have a diversified economy, and this kind of sources of dependence on fossil fuel will not really be a harm to one of the major fossil fuel and hydrocarbon exporters of countries. I wish that the same kind of wisdom prevails elsewhere, including for the countries that are dependent on fossil fuel. Actually, people keep blaming the Ukraine crisis on the mess in the energy mix in Europe. Actually, the problems happened few months between May and September 2021. This was few months before the Ukraine crisis. The energy mix in Europe increased by 90%. This had nothing to do with the war in the Ukraine. Actually, matters got more complicated after that. So this again gives me very much strong support to the arguments related to a holistic approach. Just energy transition, if we can consider that these are one of the main outcomes of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, I think it is enough. Definitely, there is enough, because we're talking here about implementation and how to deal with matters related to climate change. The Egyptian presidency of the COP, and I'm happy that the UAE presidency of COP28 are emphasizing this practical approach. Egypt emphasized إنفاذ العهود والتعهدات, implementation of the promises or delivering on the promises. And the UAE is focusing on solutions, which is the same kind of practical approach on public-private partnerships that need to be done. But that needs really the kind of wisdom that should come from universities, from think tanks, and from research centers, and from the private sector to deal with the issue. The third aspect that I hope it will continue, many of the problems are not going to be solved at a local or national level, and just talking about matters from 40,000 feet high is not going to be the solution. So some sort of regional collaboration as well is going to be warranted. And of course, what started in Egypt through localization of sustainability is a fourth dimension. So the first is holistic, the second is implementation, the third is a regional dimension, and the fourth is the localization. If I get into the issue about finance, because borrowing from Esther Duflo in one of her events with us, the Nobel Prize laureate, I like very much the way that she managed to put matters there, because it answered this kind of areas of tension between development, fighting poverty, enhancing inclusive growth, and dealing with climate and environment. So she said, you need three things in place in order to achieve what you are after. Technology, and as we know, what we get of solutions are very much dependent on the technology and research and development. In Egypt, we wouldn't have had all of these alternatives to the traditional sources of energy, like in Benban in the south, like in Za'farana in the east, and solar and wind, and then of course the new strong comer, as mentioned by His Excellency Dr. Nuaimi, about the careful use of green hydrogen. That's all products of huge investments in research and development. So technology, research and development, and then you need to have finance. Without finance, all of that are going to be just hopes and aspirations that may end up in some sort of bad outcomes and frustration. But then, above all, we need really to see the changes in the kind of behavioral change, what kind of incentive structure that should be there for government, for business sector, and civil society in order to embrace the change. I'm saying that because with all of these outcomes that we have been seeing since Paris, and the emphasis on four main files, the first one, which is the first line of defense, which is mitigation, definitely we are failing on that. This is the first line of defense. We're not on track to achieve it. We need to reduce harmful emissions by 45% from now until 2030. We're adding actually 12 to 15% per annum. So we're deviating from target by 60%. So that's why we go to adaptation. And adaptation, Dr. Nuaimi reminded us again of the problems facing our coastal areas globally and in our home countries. And we know that we are among the least contributors to the harm, but we are harmed the most. So this kind of unfairness and unbalances that we are seeing need to be dealt with. That need those who are causing harm need to pay, need to honor their obligations. The old promise of Copenhagen mentioned by our distinguished speaker need really, including from the US and the rest of the advanced economies. 7 countries are only honoring their obligations. Actually, the US is not one of them. We know that Nordic countries are doing that. We know that Germany, the Netherlands, Japan, but we hope that the rest will come to help fixing the problems. But actually, even if the $100 billion is being delivered in full, what we need really is the trillions to fix the problems, not the billions that are promised in the 100 billion package since Copenhagen. And that requires lots of investment through the private sector. And here we have the pipeline of projects that have been built since Sharm el-Sheikh with good opportunities to deal with the with mitigation and adaptation opportunities. And that gets me into the last point, which is basically about the loss and damage, which was mentioned by Dr. Nuaimi, because you need the loss and damage line of defense, because the first two lines of defense on mitigation and adaptation had been compromised. So actually in Egypt this month, we know that the international committee responsible for the preparation and the transition to build that loss and damage fund are going to meet before the end of this month. This is going to be their first meeting, and they need to finish their work fast because they are required to submit the outcomes of their work by the time we all meet, inshallah, in Dubai in November. And the very final point, I said final, but basically the final mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage. It's all about finance. Mitigation needs finance, adaptation requires finance, and loss and damage is all about finance. So we need really to be more sophisticated in mobilizing funding. We cannot really be relying on borrowing. Actually, more than 75% of finance for climate, for developing economies is coming through debt instruments. The same trouble for the advanced economies, but we depend less by like 62% on debt. So we need really to have more private equity participation, and we need more grants. But again, very grateful to this opportunity to comment on the presentation and our very distinguished speaker. And I hope that he can make his presentation available to the benefit of the students and researchers. And this is a good start for a dialogue that is now being taken with a push from COP27 and with COP28 in the UAE raising the flag soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud. And again, very, very useful comments and observation. I'm going to try to acknowledge our colleagues who are online. If there is any question online, Dr. Shireen Ghunaim will take that.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Thank you, our distinguished speaker and lead commentator. We've got 4 questions from online. One is a question that actually asks about how can we measure debt for climate swaps for academic purposes. That's an anonymous attendee from Tagheer. She's asking a question on how can individuals maintain the climate change issue. From Samuel Diamond, there's a question that animal agriculture is the #1 cause of climate change. 50% of food grown in the world is fed to animals. Any advice for Egyptians to change their diets? And finally, actually, before finally, I have a question. The globe is focusing on the African countries and the harm they're causing to the climate. But are the people in authority focusing on countries like China, who are relying on very old methods with their manufacturing processes? And the final one, keep saying final and we get, so a couple more. From Zakaria Yahya, what are the policies of involving, encourage or enforcement individuals and countries to participate actively in the GHG emissions mitigation? The final one from Musumi Boral, how can educational institutions contribute to sustainability futures? And what are the important criteria of G20 that can be raised for consciousness for teachers' contribution? Thank you.
Say that we face disasters. Now, on the individual sense, how do we mitigate? It is very simple. Our usage in terms of lighting, our usage in terms of food, our usage in terms of should actually be thought of when it comes to individuals. This problem of climate change is more of governments. Individuals really have very little to contribute. Two main contributors, industries and individuals. When it comes to industries, I'm not sure if the agriculture is the main contributor. Actually, the construction industry participates by 50% on the usage of material, on the usage of accessories, in the usage of gases, in the usage of services. So construction industry does participate the highest, and we should be looking into some governance. And that is very essential. Again, this is more of governmental type of thing. We should be looking into the environmental social governance when it comes to individuals. Now, if you put forward such governance for people, what to use and what to use, for industry, what to use and what not to use, then we would violate those who are not committing themselves into this governance. However, the agriculture, yes, most of our methane comes from there. And that is a huge participation. If we use the proper material on what we produce and what we cultivate and how we use our industry as such. But there is individuals can have very little, very limited contribution if the industries provide them with sustainable elements that they can utilize, then people will go for it. Today, with the education that we face worldwide, people are aware, they are enlightened with what we've got on stake, and they are following it. So I believe that we have so much to ask, but very little to offer when it comes to agreements, when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to the economy of material use. So it is very complicated, but I believe that we should be having an authority that could make it easier for the industries with governance that could help a lot.
Thank you very much. I wonder if Dr. Mahmoud wants to contribute to the answer of this question, especially the one about the educational institution, how they might be able to measure their resources they need to or financing in order to produce results. Anything you want to add, Dr. Mahmoud?
Right. Two quick things. I'm happy with the answer provided by His Excellency Dr. Nuaimi, but let me add two things. First, on the issue of the blame game that we are seeing around including the historical emissions from the advanced economies and the new emissions coming from emerging markets. It's all about realizing the importance of consumption and production behavior and technologies. Even if some are blaming China and India today, for instance, other emerging markets, you need to check at the same time the kind of production and consumption behavior from some of the advanced economies, because these economies, the emerging markets, are export-oriented, and whatever they are producing in their homeland ends up consumed in other places. So I think here a better collaborative model that should really abandon the blame to get our action together in the right direction is very much needed. The other thing about the role of universities. Here, we spoke briefly about the business sector, but there is a demand really from, now I'm talking to the presence of the Dean of the Business School and the President of the university was with us as well. There is a great deal of concern about methodologies and concepts when it comes to ESG, the environment, social, and governance. The metric is all over the place. Anything that you can do, and this is multidisciplinary kind of work that you require. And a recent report came from the UN about the role of business and universities and government regulators to deal with the problems associated with the kind of greenwashing that we have and ESG washing that we have. So I think two things are required. First, the universities as the brain trusts of societies and think tanks, they need really to collaborate with regulators in order to develop a clear and clean standards for ESG investments and how to measure better the emissions and the claims for dealing with the emissions and the impact investment. And here is the big area of work for researchers, for students, and for professors of universities. The second part is basically about the role of universities in dealing with the three scopes, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 of emissions, and how can you start by yourselves as universities and networks to promote that and get the students to be part of the solution. And I like to mention that there is an academic network that was created for COP27 and COP28, building on the Universities Alliance of COP26. And I encourage you to be part of it. I know that Nine University, for instance, is part of the network that for the higher education institutions, but the work needs to continue, and there are lots of opportunities for COP28 on that. Over to you.
Thanks again, Dr. Mahmoud. It's always encouraging to hear the voice of the visionary and the practitioner at the same time. Let me see if there is any question from the audience. Dr. Al-Mahdi, Dean of the School of Information Technology and Computer Science.
Thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. I actually come from Alexandria, right? And I'm worried about Alexandria.
Me too.
So I'm just asking, right, as maybe university or like Egypt, what can we do for these kind of coastal problems? If you have any insight, how can we save Alexandria and other similar cities? Thank you.
Thank you. One thing that we really need to know that 85% of our development are coastal. It's not only Alexandria, but the coast with all infrastructure that we're invested during the last 2 or 3 decades is actually here is to be thought of. Now, the touch with Alexandria is something else. I have looked at the report and I felt that we are not doing what it takes to really cope with the existing sea rise, let alone what is coming. I believe the enlightenment we make within the universities are very essential. Studying that coastal, we don't have. I was looking into any real research work apart from this report that we face. Real research work on the last 20 years about our coasts, whether it is in Egypt or in the United Arab Emirates or in any coastal country, Arab country. I have not seen academic research that says that we have that incremental sea rise in this place or in the other one. So the difficulty comes with the non-availability of research work. That's why I say the enlightenment that we face, we see here with the universities, whether the Nile University or any other institution, academic institution, research institutions, should actually be doing more than what they do. We shouldn't be copying what we get from the other side of the continent. In Glasgow, Dr. Mahmoud touched this very well. In Glasgow, 92 countries agreed on a pledge submitted by United States to look into methane. Only 40 or less countries ratified that. So less than half ratified that specific. I believe why they didn't, because we do not have enough research on it. I think it's essential for institutions to look into the impact, not only looking at it from existing research or literature. Experimental literature are very essential. We don't have it in either Alexandria nor other coast. The coastal area in our city. Now in Jakarta, Indonesia, they know by research how much this sea rise or the influence of water is affecting their city. So they are actually going to build another city. Madagascar is the same. I'm surprised to see no actions in our region to do some good research that is good enough to make decision makers make their way along. What they receive are reports from IPCC or the United Nations forums, and that is I don't think that it is enough, because they're looking into something else rather than our own coastal areas. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah. Let me,
Dr. Hassan, if I may,
came out with in this discussion. Number one, this holistic approach that Dr. Mahmoud is talking about.
Dr. Hassan, if I may, just to add something.
Please, go ahead.
Are you concluding?
Not yet. We have 5
Okay,
minutes.
very good. But given the good reaction to this important question by His Excellency Dr. Nuaimi and the importance of research, there are two things. One, a possibility that I'm suggesting, if Nile University can join forces with the 9 initiatives led by the University of Alexandria under the leadership of Dr. Abdulaziz Mansour. I was there in October, and I'm aware that they are conducting 9 areas of work, including actually the how to defend the coastal areas of Alexandria. And that this more on the practical side. Perhaps more research is required, as suggested by Dr. Nuaimi, but they are taking some steps, and there are lots of good work led by, I think, the Faculty of Engineering there. The second area of work that came out from Sharm el-Sheikh, in the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, in which it has 5 areas of work: agriculture, water system, food security, and dealing with deforestation. But the matters related to coastal areas is on the top of that. And perhaps we may need to consider reaching out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Mohammed Nasr and his team, because I think they managed to mobilize some resources to support technical work for adaptation. This is not a substitute for the bigger scheme of things that's suggested by His Excellency Dr. Nuaimi, but this at least could be a good start, collaboration between the 2 universities and getting some funds Egypt specific. And I hope that what could come from COP28 is in line with what Minister Nuaimi just mentioned now about encouraging research centers to do more work in their local jurisdictions and the affected areas.
Thank you very much. You actually stole my second point. So let me give you my first point. The holistic approach that you mentioned, Dr. Mahmoud, is not going to work unless there is economic incentives. The carbon dioxide has been in the forefront because of the carbon certificate. And I was thinking about what could be the motivation for people to take the holistic approach. I think if we have an emission certificate, I don't want to say pollutant, but I think emission certificate could be the substitute where all of these elements need to be studied and to be valued the same way we are valuing the carbon dioxide. And again, this is going to be a collective work and needs a lot of research in order to determine the value of the methane versus the other pollutant. But in the end, you will have a system where through demand and supply, any industry, any company, any even household could receive certain incentives financially if they reduce the emission. And of course, this will give a lot of research, Dr. Mahmoud, for how they could value these other parts. That's the point. I wanted to comment about the point about research for the sea, the cities and the coastal areas and so on. The first I heard about it was almost 20 years ago. And I heard about it, about Alexandria in particular, when I was at Ohio State. And there was a lot of people at the time actually getting a grant from the NSF, from the Oceanic, I think, studies, who were trying to figure out what will happen at the time to Alexandria. And the first alarm I heard, again, this was 20 years ago. And they have been studying it, and I'm trying to refresh my memory now to see what happened with it, but it seems like this has been in the radar, scientific radar for some time. We are still sleeping on the wheel, and that's always the problem with our region. So maybe, Dr. Mahmoud, if we have the Alexandria group connected with other group who have been studying this for some time, this could very well be, again, a call for saving the city in this case. I think we probably out of time. Do you want to have one more question from our online? Okay.
I would be very selective in the interest of time. Our speakers have already addressed quite a few from what has been emerging in the questions. The couple that you may wish to attend to is asking about if the planning would include the SME sector as stakeholders, and what is the finance allocation priorities, And another question is also related to, is there some preventive procedures that can be followed instead of waiting for global mobilization of resources? And if there's any intention or promise from developed countries to transfer technologies related to green energy to developing countries with respect to TRIPS arrangements. And I would apologize to the other questions from online in the interest of time.
All right, I think Dr. Abdullah will take a stab at that.
I will take a shot in the last one, and Dr. Mahmoud is more qualified really to speak on about the other three. Now, when it comes to green energy being sent to the advanced countries, I think we have always been on the receiving end. Non-developed countries, developing countries are, when it comes to climate change, they were on the receiving end. They have received all the emission that has polluted our atmosphere, and today we are also receiving what they assume is good for us. I know that there are so many developing countries are actually looking into initiatives like hydrogen. Some of them are also countries that are probably the biggest today. Hydrogen is actually in the United Arab Emirates. They're working on green energy. So far, there is no green energy in the industry. There has always been the colors of the rainbow, from gray to blue to golden to whatever, but green energy is still in the United Arab Emirates. They're working hard in doing so. But the problem is not the manufacturing of it. Today, to produce hydrogens, new thought came to us as well, and also it came from the non-institutional individuals. We are now given a new theme, that is carbon capturing and storage. Everybody is speaking about carbon capturing. This is in the area. Now it's again another disaster that we should be facing on the future. If you really capture, it is not carbon. We are looking into carbon dioxide. We are capturing carbon dioxide, storing it on earth or in landfill, and we don't know what this carbon dioxide would do 50 kilometers underground. We have no research work that shows that this will stay forever. So I think the developing countries are really have always been, in the knowledge sense, they are on the receiving end, and on the technology as well, they are on the receiving end.
Dr. Mahmoud.
Right. Thank you so much. Two things here I'd like to react to. One about the issue of the business sector, small and medium enterprises, and their role. There are constraints on small and medium businesses to do more in areas related to climate without really good collaboration with their aggregators. So the advice here, while I appreciate individual brave initiatives, it's basically the importance of collaboration through the aggregators like the federations of industry, like the chambers of commerce, like the investment societies, and that all need to be supported fully by business schools and research centers and scientific platforms in think tanks, research centers, and universities. There are some good experiments in that, and I have seen some of them coming actually along as winners in the localization initiative that was conducted last year in Egypt on picking green and smart projects. And I know that Nile University was interested in this initiative, which actually I'm happy to see today that it is starting for its second edition for this year. It was just announced by the government that this initiative is coming to select the greener and the cleaner and the smartest of the projects, and being at Nile University with the emphasis on technology and digital transformation. And now this big interest on sustainability, I think is a great opportunity for that. It's basically about getting matters at scale. What always concerns me, this file of climate action, I have seen scattered brave solutions, but what we have here is a very complex, very complicated problem that requires scale for investments in dealing with them. I believe in leverage, but the leveraging itself needs a kind of critical minimum for that. The second point about this issue of knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer has only main two effective channels. There could be many others, but one of them is through what you do in technical cooperation, in sending bright minds abroad and bringing some of the qualified staff to be part of universities and think tanks. This is great. And that takes its own pace and has its own comparative advantages. The other way to bring technology is through investments. When we are investing now, our region in green hydrogen, in wind farms, in solar, and many other experiments, and now we are getting ourselves into the protection of nature. All of these technology-based solutions requires FDI. It requires public-private partnership, not just with the local investors, but with the international investors. One of the things that we need to encourage in our Arab region at large is basically, even for the countries that are not in need for money, as we can see in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, they are not in need for dollars or euros, but they are keen in partnerships in order to get better and more advanced knowledge solutions, advances in technologies, and adapt them. This is the tricky part, how to get these technologies and adapt them to the needs of society and the economy. Same for Egypt. We bring that back in the forefront, not just as part of sales of assets or something like that. This is for short-term kind of solutions of macroeconomic imbalances. But what we need is to value partnership with the business sector and the international academia for advancements of our knowledge and being much more on top of these solutions. It's basically, again, about this three areas of focus: finance, technology, and behavioral change. Get the three together. One of them is not enough.
Thank you again very, very much. We're really very grateful to Professor Mahmoud Mohieldin. There is an 8-hour difference, I believe, and he has been up since the dawn of Washington. And I think he still have another session at 6 o'clock. I would like Dr. Shireen to make an announcement for his session that will review his co-authored book with the other, I think, 3 more authors, Dr. Mahmoud.
Yes, I'm happy that this will be discussed today. I have a discussion of this book, Business, Government, and the SDGs, with Dr. Sameh Abba, Dr. Maria Alejandra Gonzalez Perez, and with Miral Shahata. And this is very much continuing the excellent talk by His Excellency Minister Nuaimi. It's the same topic, but taking it through the Sustainable Development Goals, emphasizing the holistic approach.
Thank you again. It has been really a pleasure for all of us to host these distinguished scholars. and also people who have been in the field doing a lot of work for the good of humanity. Before we leave, we have a small token of appreciation to Dr. Abdullah Al Nuaimi, who is, by the way, is going from here to the airport directly. This will be handed in by Professor Rائid, the president of the university.
Like I just say a few things. Well, I mean, thank you very much really for this wonderful lecture. I mean, I call it a lecture because it was really educating for me. Because I always had the impression that what we are facing today in Alexandria or the coastal cities is really the effect of things that happened tens of years ago. So I'm not quite sure if what we are going to do here is going to save the cities, or really we're going to have to do with like in Jakarta and Morocco to relocate Alexandria itself. But what has been said right now, it gives a promise, it gives something, it gives hope actually. If you start now doing serious research, how we're going to not to reverse the effect, but how to mitigate the factors, then there's a chance. And I'm glad to hear about the initiative in Alexandria University. I'm going to communicate with Professor Consor in order to see exactly how far we can cooperate together in this one. But this is very, very important, what has been mentioned today. And also the idea of that, well, carbon dioxide is really, but it may not be the only killer. There are other killers beneath that, which are really 22,000 more deadlier than the other one, but maybe because everything is transformed back into carbon, this one. Just as illuminating as it is, it's really very important. And thank you very much for giving up this lecture. And we really hope to be able to build on this in designing our research strategy and our development strategy at Nile University. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Anna, Doctor, I should thank you very much. I should really appreciate Dr. Mahmoud back on Washington for being with us. I know it's very early, but really your input was really great to me and great to the audience. Dr. Anna, I should thank you for coming here and for giving me the opportunity to really provide a little bit of enlightenment. Dr. Hassan has been doing a lot of effort to make this happening, and I should thank him for it. It's really great opportunity to really look into the things differently. And I believe that is the role of the elite. If you ride the wave, you end up where the wave will take you. If you really look into which wave would you ride, maybe you can have the decision by yourself. And that is really nice to get that collaboration with Alexandria, because Alexandria is dear to all of us, all the African, the Arab. It's a city where we think nothing more than it. If there is anything that I could be of an assistant to, I would be glad to participate. I have done a lot of reading work on Alexandria specifically, and maybe we can make some common initiative, and we'd be glad to help.
Thank you again very much, everybody. Thank you for coming here. This will end the session. I have to thank ERF for the excellent management of lecture as usual. They are, as I say, my partner in crime. This time, they have been very benevolent and very impactful. My dear friend, Dr. Mahmoud Mohieldin, can't thank you enough. You really made the lecture much more powerful, much more impactful. I thank the student who has been here, and the people who lasted are the people who are very resistant. You are the future. You are the one who's going to change the future for our globe rather than our country. I know some people left for the lecture, but thank you all for coming here.
For those who are here, or students, or those guests, you're going to be getting the hint. This is when we talk about 2050, the end of the century, 1000. We're not going to be here. We've polluted what we did. Maybe we helped as much as we can, but you are the people who would be getting the real hit. So you have to be very careful in participating on such an impact. All the work that we do, we are not doing it for us. We're doing it for you. Thank you.
شكرا مرة أخرى ونراكم الله إن شاء الله في محاضرات قادمة.